To some, following last year's media coverage, it seemed a guarantee that Lucy Letby was guilty. Citing an apparent confession note, a shift chart, and the use of prosecution witnesses, it seemed like the story had for the most part run its course. However, a lifting of very strict reporting restrictions has had some speaking out questioning some or all of the construction of events that took place at the criminal trial. The shift chart has been lambasted by members of the Royal Statistical Society as highly manipulated, and I've done another video on the confession note, so I won't get into that here. You have to feel bad for the affected families having this issue repeatedly dragged out. However, I think it's worth pointing out some of the affected families were the ones asking for the upcoming Thirlwell public inquiry into the events at the Countess of Chester Hospital to be live streamed. So I think they may be amongst many people looking for more conclusive answers. To briefly address some of the recent criticism, one aspect of the prosecution case that has been severely criticised is in some cases the proposed mechanism of murder via blasting air through a nasogastric tube, which was described after consultation with 8 experts in The Guardian as, quote, rubbish, ridiculous, implausible, and fantastical. With growing concerns about the case in recent weeks, former Health Secretary Nadine Dorries has spoken out, and as of today, 21st July, current MP David Davies has been reported as drawing up a number of questions to be raised at Parliament. Also released today has been a disturbing report in the Sunday Telegraph that witnesses who wanted to testify as part of the Letby defence were warned off by the hospital trust in what could potentially be described as a low level of witness intimidation, if accurate. Coming back into the spotlight are some of the doctors who worked at the hospital during the time frame of the tragic incidents. One of those doctors is Dr Ravi Jayaram. Dr Jayaram was lionised by the media in last year's immediate post-conviction aftermath for his work in allegedly catching Letby. Memories which he said were, quote, emblazoned in his mind and, quote, etched in my memory and will be in my nightmares forever, to be honest, unquote. However, there are increasing questions with regards to his documentation and reporting of what he saw, if accurate. Further, for whatever reason, there are questions with regards to the veracity of his other statements in comparison to witness accounts from other nurses, not just Letby. There are also renewed questions surrounding the quality of care at Countess of Chester Hospital, which relate to him and also other doctors at the hospital. Remember, feel free to pause if you don't have enough time to read any of these screenshots. If you go by the prosecution description of events, then Jayaram caught Letby, quote, virtually red-handed, attempting a murder February 17th, 2016. Not only did he not do anything to report it at the time, the following quotes are from Rachel Aviv's New Yorker article, which is described as taking place in March 2017, 13 months after he caught Letby, quote, virtually red-handed. Jayaram frames it as Letby saying, quote, I've got evidence from my grievance process that you and Steve Beery orchestrated a campaign to have me removed. I've got evidence that you were heard in the queue to the cafe accusing me of murdering babies. Jayaram responds to this by saying, quote, now I've got a big mouth, but I wouldn't stand in a public place doing that. There are several head scratchers from this exchange as far as I'm concerned. The first thing I would infer from the exchange is that Jayaram denied to Letby at the time of having accused her of murdering babies. So call me suspicious, but I find it a bit strange that a guy would deny accusing a nurse of murdering babies if same said nurse is later found guilty of murdering babies. Towards the end of this excerpt, Letby apparently offers an olive branch which Jayaram reluctantly accepts, saying, quote, I came away from that meeting really angry, but I was not angry at her, I was angry at the system. The other factor to this is that Jayaram is agreeing to work with Letby in March 2017. Remember, the prosecution narrative is that Letby murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 8 more between summer 15 and summer 2016. So despite apparently having worked alongside Letby whilst all of this unfolded, he's agreeing to work with her months after it happened. I think it's worth considering that there are whistleblowers who historically have lost careers and jobs. Can I ask the listener, is the death of a baby something you would risk your job over? If you look at Navalny in Russia, standing up for what you believe in can have even worse consequences. In the case of Jayaram, he finally went to the police 1 month after he was forced to apologise to Letby and 9 months after she was last working on the ward. A natural question to wonder is if Letby had never filed the aforementioned grievance, would Dr Jayaram have ever gone to the police? In terms of a source for this timeline, quoting this from the New Yorker article, in April 2017, with the permission of the Countess leadership, Jayaram and another paediatrician met with a detective from the Cheshire Police and shared their concerns. Within 10 minutes of us telling the story, the superintendent said, "Well, we'll have to investigate this," Jayaram said. "It's a no-brainer." I think the next bit should probably raise a few red flags about the police investigation. In May, the police launched what they called Operation Hummingbird. A detective later said that Breary and Jayaram provided the golden thread of our investigation. Dr Jayaram was criticised by one of the mothers who was treated at the Countess of Chester Hospital, who said in the Daily Mail, quote, "I haven't managed to get much sleep since the verdict. I appreciate hindsight is wonderful, but I don't understand why Dr Jayaram did nothing." The other issue for me with this exchange, because there is now doubt with regards to the medical evidence. To play devil's advocate, let's imagine you're a hard-working professional nurse, which according to most accounts, Letby was prior to these allegations. If you superimpose normal person standards onto Letby for 2 seconds, can you imagine how insulting it would be to be accused of murdering a baby if you're working as part of a team effort that went south? I think many would find that grossly offensive. Of course, the counter to that is that she has been found guilty by 2 juries. However, juries have been wrong before in the UK, particularly in cases of this nature. To give an example of Letby's popularity on the unit amongst some, the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health released a report in September 2016 where they said, focusing on an underlined segment in red here, her nursing colleagues on the unit were reported to think highly of her and how she responded to emergencies and other difficult situations, especially when a transport team were involved. End quote. That said, if you pause and read the whole segment, it paints her in a positive light. There are some inconsistencies in what Dr Jayaram has said between what he said in Trial 1 and what he said in the media, but the next thing I'm going to get into is the inconsistencies in the statements of Jayaram from Trial 1 to Trial 2. Not everyone knows this, but in high-profile cases such as this, many media outlets assign court reporters who deliver play-by-play court reports. These court reports could be considered similar to play-by-play accounts that often accompany sporting events. Due to the fact that people can talk faster than they can type, these reports don't get everything down, but it is possible to look through these play-by-play reports and get a lot of quotes for the key points. As I understand it, these play-by-play reports differ from the official trial transcript, which does contain the complete information of everything said. Something that happened between the first Letby trial and the second Letby trial is that keycard entries for swiping into the neonatal unit and swiping out were reversed. For some reason, this received very little media coverage, which is surprising because the case was based around the idea that Letby had a precise window of opportunity to dislodge a tube when no one was looking. The Daily Mail podcast are one of only a few media outlets who acknowledge the reversal of the swiping in and swiping out timings for the second trial, albeit they only did it in their final podcast in the series. The issue wasn't acknowledged at all in the BBC coverage or on the Crime Scene to Courtroom channel on YouTube that also followed the case. If you really want to confirm the reversal of timings took place, you could do it by listening to the Daily Mail Letby podcast and the episode called, quote, Baby K, She Was Defenseless. They get into it from about 22 minutes 12 seconds to 24 minutes. However, even if a lot of media outlets did not directly address the keycard data, you can establish it by comparing and contrasting the two play-by-play reports from Trial 1 to Trial 2. In the next slide, I will show the keycard timings for nurse Joanne Williams, who was a neutral witness in Trial 1, used by the prosecution to establish a timeline. In the second trial, with the reversal of the keycard data, she is at odds with Dr Jayaram. So putting these two different versions of nurse Joanne Williams' keycard activity together in one image, which you are free to pause if you want to process this issue, which is key to the trial. The top image is from the Chester Standard play-by-play, February 28, 2023. It says nurse Joanne Williams left the neonatal unit at 3:47 a.m. The bottom screenshot is from the Chester Standard play-by-play, June 20th, 2024, which says she actually went into the neonatal unit at 3:47 a.m. At a distance, this could seem pedantic. However, you have to remember Dr. Jayaram has made a lot of melodramatic statements about this moment, including the fact he looked at his watch.
Okay. That is a night that is etched on my memory and will be in my nightmares forever, to be honest.
So now looking at Dr. Jayaram's testimony, which is from February 28th, 2023, and the link to the Chester Standard report is in the description. 2:48 p.m. The court is showing swipe data for Joanne Williams, who left the neonatal unit at 3:47 a.m. Remember, these timings are reversed in the second trial. Mr. Myers says it is very precise in coinciding with Dr. Jayaram's recollection of waiting 2 to 3 minutes before the desaturation is timed at 3:50 a.m. and asks if Dr. Jayaram always had such a precise memory. Dr. Jayaram says, in this event I did. He adds, I kept telling myself, don't be ridiculous. I looked at my watch, I didn't have a stopwatch. So once again, it's very bizarre that he has this precise memory of looking at the watch, even though we now know the police got the swipe data wrong at this time point. The testimony continues, quote, Dr. Jayaram says it would be appreciated if Mr. Myers gave an indication of where he was going with his questioning. This particular quote I think is quite interesting. Here you have Dr. Jayaram bristling at the mere suggestion that his testimony may be incorrect. However, by trial 2, it's hard to identify a time period where Letby would have been alone and had a window of opportunity to commit the attack. Furthermore, his recollection of events seems to be at odds with two nurses. In my opinion, it would have been more modest of Dr. Jayaram to at least raise the possibility that his recollection may have been flawed. Here he seems to be adamant that nurse Joanne Williams, Lucy Letby, and another nurse who testified anonymously are all definitely wrong, whereas he's the only one correct. Mr. Myers says an earlier police interview had Dr. Jayaram not giving a precise estimate of how long Joanne Williams had been out, but is able to now give a more precise estimate several years later. Dr. Jayaram is quoted as saying, the point is this incident happened in the window when she, as in Joanne Williams, was out. He tells the court this incident is, quote, emblazoned in his mind. You have to wonder if this incident is emblazoned accurately. In the first trial, there was a window after Joanne Williams swipes out at 3:47 for Letby to be alone and attack. By trial 2, we now know that she actually swiped back in at 3:47. The issue is further complicated by the fact that nurse Caroline Oakley, who was assigned to nursery room 1, but says she can't remember the events, swipes back in at 3:40, with the prosecution timing the attack at 3:45, contradicting Dr Jayaram's earlier testimony of remembering looking at his watch at 3:50. The following is from the Chester Standard 19th June 2024, timestamped so you can quickly scroll to it for corroboration. 3:34 p.m. Mr. Myers asks about the alarm system. Dr. Jayaram says he is, quote, absolutely certain it was not sounding. He is asked to look at a 2018 police interview at Blackham Police Station, and at the time he said he couldn't remember. Dr. Jayaram says, quote, I don't know why I said that, end quote. He says if the alarm was sounding, he would have been alerted into the room. Once again, there are several very, very bizarre things about Dr. Jayaram's testimony here. Firstly, the qualifier, I don't know why I said that. We know from his earlier statements he has a big mouth. You wonder, does he also apparently have Tourette's? The other factor is the incident at the police station was 1 year after the incident, whereas this is now 8 years later and he is adamant he has a perfect recollection. 3:36 p.m. It continues. Mr. Myers says Dr. Jayaram said for a second and third time later that interview he couldn't remember if the alarm had gone off or not. Dr. Jayaram says, quote, with absolute certainty it was not an alarm sounding that prompted him to go into the room. The following excerpt is from the Chester Standard play-by-play, Thursday, June 20th, 2024, and it refers to Nurse Joanne Williams. Miss Williams is asked about her return to the nursery room 1. It is in nursery room 1 where Dr. Jayaram is claiming he catches Lucy Letby dislodging a tube, silencing the alarms, in an attempt to slowly watch her die.
Ordinarily, number one, the alarms would have been going off.
Nurse Joanne Williams frames Dr. Jayaram as not really knowing what's going on, and from the sounds of things, looking for someone to blame as much as catching Letby in the act. The Chester Standard quote her saying that Dr. Jayaram said, quote, what's happened and who was in the room at the time, end quote. Remember, if he had just caught Letby in the act, emblazoned in his mind, etc., it's unlikely he would be asking who was in the room at the time. The following is a quote from Prosecutor Nick Johnson's closing speech. If you want to verify it, it can be found in the description as the live feed from the Chester Standard for the 1st of July, and it is timestamped at 12:34. Quote, she, as in Joanne Williams, had said Dr. Jayaram had asked her who was in the room at the time the alarm went off, at the time of the first desaturation. You may wonder why the Chester Standard didn't get the full quote the first time, or did they make an error later? I think it comes down to the issue of talking faster than you can type. The next disputed claim from Jayaram is that Letby didn't call for help.
But number two, the nurse would have called for help.
This is at odds with the statements of another nurse. Source Chester Standard, Thursday, 20th of June, 2024. 12:50 p.m. The nurse recalls there was a handover huddle which took place at about 7:25 a.m. At that point, Letby gave a call for help from Nursery 1, and all nursing staff and Dr. Jayaram went into the room. She says Letby had her hands in the incubator, neo-puffing child K. So you may be wondering why the jury in the second trial found Lucy Letby guilty if there are all these credibility issues with Ravi Jayaram. Observationally, the first jury couldn't reach a verdict on the baby K thread of the trial, and yet the first were presented with a much more cogent timeline and more identifiable window of an opportunity for attack. I think it comes down to the judge allowing bad character evidence and Letby's prior convictions. Referring back to this segment of Prosecutor Nick Johnson's closing speech, he refers to Joanne Williams, who was questioned about the desaturations. She had said Dr. Jayaram had asked her who was in the room at the time the alarm went off at the time of the first desaturation. Mr. Johnson says there is a red herring here. He says Joanne Williams could have confused elements of the second desaturation with the first. He said Dr. Jayaram's words to her would make perfect sense if that was after the second desaturation. He says it would suit Dr. Jayaram's words with his suspicious mind at that point. So prosecutor Nick Johnson was essentially saying that nurse Joanne Williams was confused, and Jayaram's third, you could call reflection on the events, was the correct one, having previously stated he couldn't remember if the alarms were sounding in the police interview, and also saying he looked at the time of 3:50 on his watch in the first trial. So going forward, I think there are still major questions as to what exactly happened at the Countess of Chester Hospital between summer 2015 and summer 2016. In the immediate post-conviction aftermath, Dr. Jayaram had head of nursing Karen Rees in his crosshairs. He has also been critical of some of the hospital former leaders at executive level. I think there is a potential for the upcoming public inquiry led by Lady Justice Thirlwall to descend into a finger-pointing match. However, with ongoing questions surrounding the medical evidence, I think a better use of time may be put into making 100% sure that the scientific explanations for what happened are accurate. On that note, I'm going to conclude this video.